For 300 years the colony world of Aurelian had known only gentle things. Its skies were soft blue glass in the morning and rivers of gold by evening. Wind moved through the wheat terraces like a mother's hand through a child's hair. The cities were white and low to the ground, built beside orchards, schools, lakes, and open markets where no one feared the stranger walking behind them. The loudest sounds most days were harvest drones humming over the valley and children laughing in the school gardens beneath the twin moons. There were no bunkers on Aurelian. No anti-orbital cannons. No missile silos. No military barracks hidden beneath the hills. Why would there be? Humanity had abandoned that version of itself a very long time ago. The old war fleets had been dismantled, the old battle doctrines sealed in archives no citizen was permitted to read, and the old language of annihilation had become something professors discussed in shame-heavy lectures to quiet rooms. The Terran worlds did not build for war anymore. They built for trade, for music, for medicine, for better soil, for longer lives, for kinder futures. On Aurelian, even the constables carried pulse batons tuned for crowd control and animal sedation. Their uniforms were polished. Their boots were clean. Their hands had never once been asked to do anything uglier than break up drunken arguments outside cider houses during the autumn festivals. That was the kind of world Aurelian was. That was why the children were outside when the sky split open. Teacher Mara Vance had 26 students with her in the Eastern Botanical Preserve, all of them kneeling in the warm grass with sample trays in their laps, giggling as they compared petals under the filtered morning sun. One little boy with a missing front tooth had decided the red flowers looked like exploding stars. A girl beside him said they looked like crowns. Mara was smiling as she walked between them, correcting posture, brushing dirt from sleeves, reminding them to label their specimens properly so the archive scanners would not reject them later. Then the light changed. Not dimmer. Wrong. The shadows on the grass twisted. The air above the preserve rippled like heat over metal. Birds rose from the trees all at once in a frenzy of wings. Every insect in the garden went silent. Mara looked up and the breath left her body so fast it hurt. The sky was tearing. A wound of black fire opened over the valley, jagged and impossible, stretching from horizon to horizon. It was not a cloud. It was not weather. It was as if the fabric of the heavens had been gripped by invisible claws and ripped apart. Something vast moved behind it. Then the first alien warship came through. It descended nose first out of the rupture, all sharp obsidian angles and burning violet vents, large enough to drown a city in shadow. A second followed. Then a third. Then a fourth, until the morning sky above Aurelian was full of monstrous spear-shaped vessels hanging so low that their hulls blotted out the sun. For one heartbeat the colony simply stared. No alarm sirens sounded. No defense grid rose to meet them. There was only silence and the awful, collective disbelief of a civilization that had truly believed such a thing would never happen to them. Mara found her voice first. "Inside!" she screamed, already running toward the children. "Everybody inside now. Move!" The students were crying before they even understood why. Some dropped their trays and bolted. Others froze, staring upward with wide, confused eyes. Mara grabbed the nearest two by the shoulders and shoved them toward the preserve building. Her own pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct she had was useless. Every emergency drill they had ever practiced was built for storms, fires, chemical leaks, not this. Not warships falling out of torn space above a school garden. Across the colony capital people began to run. Market tables overturned. Transit lanes locked up in seconds. Parents abandoned cafes and office towers and maintenance hubs and came sprinting into the streets, calling names into comms that suddenly crackled with static. The governor's office issued a half-formed emergency broadcast that cut out after 7 words. Freight drones dropped from the sky as signal traffic collapsed. In hospitals, nurses turned toward the windows just in time to see dropships pouring from the bellies of the black vessels overhead. They did not descend on government towers. They did not strike the power stations. They did not target the comm relays, the freight depots, or the water processors. They went for the schools. All over Aurelian, metallic dropships screamed down through the clouds and landed in playgrounds, academy courtyards, pediatric wards, family housing sectors, and public learning domes. Their ramps slammed open, and the invaders marched out in disciplined lines, towering shapes wrapped in dark armor that seemed grown rather than forged, their helmets insectal, their limbs too long, their movements cruelly precise. Constable Ren Calder reached the first landing zone outside the Southern Learning Complex with 8 officers and a riot shield van. They were brave men and women. They were also laughably unprepared. "Form line." Ren shouted, voice cracking as terrified civilians shoved past him in both directions. Keep them back from the entrance. Hold the line. His officers raised pulse batons and civilian-grade stun launchers. And shook. One officer muttered a prayer. Another was crying openly. Ren could not blame them. The things coming down that ramp looked like predators from some ancient nightmare, not living creatures that might be reasoned with. He keyed his loudhailer anyway. "This is Terran's civilian jurisdiction," he called, trying to force authority into his voice. "You are entering a protected educational district. Disarm immediately and identify your purpose." The lead alien did not slow. It kept walking until it was only a few paces from Ren. Up close, it stood nearly 8 feet tall, plated in dark segmented armor, its narrow mask reflecting the screaming civilians behind him. A low synthetic voice crackled from its translation grill. "Compliance is irrelevant." Ren tightened his grip on the shield. "This is your final warning." The alien backhanded him hard enough to launch him across the pavement. He hit the side of the van with a wet crunch and collapsed in a broken heap. The line shattered. Officers opened fire with stun rounds. Blue pulses splashed harmlessly across alien armor. One invader caught an officer by the throat and hurled her through a glass entrance wall. Another simply walked through baton strikes as if they were rain. Bones snapped. Bodies dropped. The fight lasted less than 20 seconds. At the botanical preserve, Mara had gotten 15 children to the main doors when the dropship landed in the field ahead of them, flattening rows of flowers beneath its engines. Heat blasted across the garden. Dirt and petals whipped into the air. The children shrieked and clung to one another. "No," Mara whispered, stepping in front of them without thinking. "No, no, no." The ramp descended. 3 armored figures emerged carrying unfamiliar devices like folded cages of silver bone. They spread out with the calm efficiency of workers beginning an ordinary harvest. One moved toward Mara. She grabbed a broken gardening spade from the ground and swung it with both hands. The metal snapped against its armor. The alien struck her once. Pain exploded through her ribs. The world spun. She hit the gravel path and tasted blood. Flat on her side, breathless and half-blind, Mara watched the silver devices unfold in the air. They expanded into latticed fields of pale light. The nets dropped over the children. Their screams cut off instantly. Small bodies froze in place, suspended mid-motion inside humming cocoons of white energy. A boy reaching for his sister. A girl with tears still on her cheeks. A child trying to run and never finishing the step. One by one, the invaders lifted them onto hovering carriers as casually as orchard workers loading fruit crates after harvest. No bombs fell on Aurelian that morning. No cities burned. No fleets exchanged fire above the clouds. The invaders did not come to conquer the colony. They came for its children. By noon, Aurelian had become a world of running feet, shattered glass, and the sound parents make when they realize the universe is not listening. Administrator Elara Sorn stood in the emergency command chamber beneath the colony hall, staring at a hollow map that was turning red district by district. School sectors. Child medical wings. Residential blocks registered to family housing. Youth recreation domes. Every place on the map that should have been safest was the place being hit the hardest. Her staff worked around her in collapsing order. Communications officers shouted over each other, trying to re-establish orbital uplink through the interference flooding the atmosphere. Civilian coordinators rerouted medics to impact zones only to lose contact with them minutes later. Someone was crying in the corner and still trying to do their job through it. Someone else was bleeding from a head wound, one hand pressed to their temple while they read casualty reports off a trembling screen. "They're bypassing infrastructure entirely," her operations chief said, voice thin with disbelief. "Power stations untouched. Water systems untouched. Transit hubs mostly ignored. They're not disabling the colony." Elara turned slowly toward him. "Then what are they doing?" No one answered because everyone in the room already knew. A security feed flickered to life on the central table. It showed the children's ward of St. Miriam Medical Complex. Nurses were trying to wheel hospital beds into a sealed elevator bay. Tiny patients in stabilizer frames. Recovery cradles. A girl no older than 7 with half her head wrapped in white bandages, clutching a stuffed animal to her chest. Then the doors at the far end of the ward split inward under the force of something massive. The invaders came through in a column of black armor and silver restraint frames. One nurse stepped in front of the first bed and spread her arms. She died before Elara could draw her next breath. The alien struck her with the blunt end of its weapon and sent her slamming into the wall hard enough to leave blood across the sterile white surface. Another nurse lunged at them with a shock prod stolen from a maintenance cart. The prod snapped against an armored forearm. The nurse's scream cut across the chamber speakers as she was thrown through a monitoring station. Then the aliens moved bed to bed. Not hurried. Not enraged. Methodical. The translation engine on one of the security officers caught a line from the lead invader as it looked over the ward. Optimal developmental yield. Elara felt something cold and poisonous enter her blood. Open a channel, she said. Administrator. Now. The technicians patched together a narrowband broadcast by brute force, piggybacking on an emergency weather relay and 3 local transit towers. Static flooded the chamber. The waveform shook. Then, with a burst of distortion, a face appeared above the table. It was not a face built for mercy. Its skull was elongated and ridged beneath a crown of metallic implants. Its eyes were glossy black stones sunk too deep into pale chitin. Needle-thin mandibles flexed at the corners of its mouth while translation software struggled to shape its voice into something human ears could bear. Elara straightened. "This is Administrator Elara Sorn of the Terran colony Aurelian," she said, forcing every word through a throat gone dry. "You are attacking a civilian population in violation of every recognized interstellar convention. State your intent and cease your operation immediately." The thing on the screen regarded her the way a biologist might regard a particularly articulate animal. Then it answered. "Terran Administrator, your conventions have no standing over the harvest." The room went still. Elara heard her own heartbeat. "Harvest? Your species possesses adaptive juvenile neuroplasticity at statistically rare levels. Your offspring are valuable. Your resistance is negligible. This extraction will continue until local yield is exhausted." A young comms technician at the rear console made a choking sound and covered his mouth with both hands. Elara stepped closer to the table. "Those are children." The alien's mandibles twitched. "Yes. They are not livestock. They are not cargo. They are human citizens. They are undeveloped biological assets," it replied. "Their reassignment serves a greater continuity than their original function warranted." One of Elara's staff swore out loud. Another smashed a fist into a console so hard it cracked the display. Elara kept her eyes on the alien. "If you continue this, you are declaring war on every human world." For the first time, the alien showed something like amusement. "War requires mutual capability." The transmission cut. For a second nobody in the command chamber moved. Nobody spoke. The sentence hung in the air like a blade. "War requires mutual capability." Outside the screams went on. In the Western District, a father named Tomas Hale reached the school annex 2 minutes too late. He had run barefoot from the fabrication yards, one sock half on, coveralls unsealed, palms cut open from where he had fallen climbing a safety rail. He hit the front plaza at a dead sprint and skidded to a stop so suddenly he nearly tore something in his leg. Children were lined across the pavement in rows of pale stasis fields. Dozens of them. His son was among them. Leo Hale, age 8, brown hair falling over one eye, one hand frozen in the air as if still trying to wave for help. "Leo!" Tomas screamed. He ran. 3 constables tried to stop him and failed because grief had already made him stronger than pain. He hit the first alien low with his shoulder and bounced off like he had struck a machine press. He got up anyway. Threw himself at the second one. Clawed at its faceplate. Beat bloody fists against its chest as it continued fastening children into a carrier frame with clinical indifference. "Let him go!" Tomas roared, voice breaking apart. "You take me. You hear me? Take me." The alien turned its head slightly as if acknowledging a noise. Then it drove an armored fist into his stomach. Tomas folded around the blow and dropped to his knees, vomiting blood onto the stones. He tried to crawl toward his son. A boot the size of a shovel head pressed him flat between the shoulder blades. The alien looked down at him and activated its translator. Adult neural structures are inefficient. Then it stepped over him and lifted Leo away. Aurelian's civilian defense network collapsed completely 43 minutes after the first ships arrived. Every responder was either dead, crippled, or reduced to trying to shepherd panicked survivors away from the landing zones. Parents armed themselves with kitchen blades, construction tools, ceremonial rifles kept as antiques, anything they could carry, anything that made them feel less helpless for one more second. It changed nothing. The invaders did not need to shoot often. They were bigger, stronger, and protected by armor built to ignore the soft, desperate violence of peaceful people. By early afternoon, the black warships began rising back toward the wounded sky. Not in retreat. In completion. Dropships returned to their bays heavy with cargo. The tears in space reopened above the colony in burning silence. Across fields, plazas, hospitals, and broken schoolyards, mothers and fathers stumbled through the wreckage calling names that no one answered. Teachers with shattered hands clawed open overturned carriers hoping one child had been missed. Medics moved from body to body and found too many adults still alive, which only meant there were more people left to grieve. When the first consolidated count reached the command chamber, nobody wanted to read it. Alara read it anyway. Then she read it again because her mind refused to accept the shape of the number. 27,412. Taken. Not wounded. Not missing in the confusion. Not estimated. Confirmed taken. And that was only from Aurelian. The reports from the other outer colonies were still coming in. The first transmission from Aurelian reached Earth 17 minutes before midnight in Geneva, and by the time the second and third arrived, the Grand Civil Assembly no longer looked like the governing heart of a peaceful species. It looked like a mausoleum. President Elias Varon stood at the center of the chamber beneath the great white dome, one hand braced against the edge of the command table as if the polished metal were the only solid thing left in the universe. Around him, hundreds of delegates, ministers, colonial liaisons, and civic scholars stared upward at the emergency feed suspended in the air above them. No one spoke. No one coughed. No one even seemed to breathe unless their body forced them to. The footage rolled in silence. A school garden under a clear morning sky. Children kneeling in the grass. The sky tearing open. Black warships descending. A hospital corridor. Nurses pushing beds. An alien stepping through smoke and shattered glass. A father thrown bleeding across a stone courtyard while his son, frozen in white light, was carried away like stolen machinery. A teacher screaming through broken ribs. A mother clawing at a departing dropship until the exhaust burned the skin from her hands. The chamber's audio had been muted by protocol to preserve order. It made everything worse. Because without sound, the suffering looked distant at first. Manageable. Almost unreal. Then the mind filled in what the silence had taken away. The screams. The pleading. The panic. The wet impacts. The sound of a civilization discovering all at once that peace did not protect the innocent from monsters. Varon's reflection stared back at him from the underside of the hollow display, pale and old and suddenly unfamiliar. How many? He asked. The question barely escaped him. It sounded scraped raw. Secretary Darius Kelm stood to the president's right with a data slate in both hands. He had once overseen planetary weather defense and disaster response. His office still carried the old ceremonial title of Secretary of Strategic Security, though strategy in the Terran worlds had long meant evacuation routes, crop failure contingencies, and orbital debris mitigation. He had never expected that title to mean war. Now his lips trembled when he answered. Confirmed from 7 outer colonies, Mr. President, 483,906 miners taken. He swallowed. Projected final count may exceed 500,000. Somewhere high in the delegates' tiers, a woman made a strangled noise and collapsed into the arms of the man beside her. No one turned to look. Varon closed his eyes. 500,000 children. 500,000 birthdays not yet lived. 500,000 bedrooms left open. 500,000 voices cut out of the future. When he opened his eyes again, the chamber had not changed. The number still hovered over the table in ghost-white columns. Colony names flashed beneath them like epitaphs. Aurelian. Vesta Reach. New Carthage. Halcyon Vale. Orizon. Pale Harbor. Eidolon Green. Whole worlds marked not by military defeat but by theft. Ambassador Lynn Sorov rose from the diplomatic bench, her face streaked with tears she had stopped trying to hide. We have to contact them again, she said. Not a colonial relay. Not emergency bandwidth. Open everything. Long-range channels. Trade lanes. Neutral envoys. I don't care how. We find out who they are and we bring them to the table. Table? Another delegate snapped, not even bothering to identify herself before the word came out. They harvested children. Lynn rounded on her. And what would you prefer we do? Send poetry at them? We don't have a fleet. The last word landed like a confession. We don't have a fleet. Everyone in the chamber knew it. Everyone had always known it, though until this night it had been a point of pride rather than shame. The Terran Expansion Charter had forbidden offensive armaments for so long that the ban no longer felt like law. It felt like identity. Human ships were haulers, surveyors, research vessels, medical transports, seed carriers, floating universities. Their worlds had weather satellites, rescue craft, and civilian patrol skiffs armed with stun arrays and hull-cutting lasers meant for salvage work. There were no dreadnoughts in Terran orbit. No strike carriers. No battle doctrine. No officer corps raised for conquest. Humanity had spent centuries teaching itself that this was wisdom. Now 500,000 children were gone. A technician at the lower console lifted a shaking hand. "Mr. President," he said. "We have a response channel." Every head in the chamber turned. The signal came through dirty and unstable, bouncing off outer relay wreckage and atmospheric scatter from 3 different colonies before finally stabilizing into a single image above the central table. The alien looked different from the one on Aurelian. Larger. Adorned with braided metal plaques and black crystalline growths along its shoulders. Authority radiated from it in the same way venom radiates from a fang. Cold, natural, casual. Its translation voice rolled through the chamber with awful calm. "Terran Governance Node. You have been granted a courtesy response to reduce inefficient emotional broadcasting across monitored channels." A low murmur of disgust moved through the delegates like wind through dry leaves. President Varen stepped forward. "I am Elias Varen of Earth," he said. "You have abducted human children from sovereign colonies. You will return every one of them immediately." The alien regarded him for a long moment. Then it answered, "Your offspring have entered processing allocation. Return is not a meaningful option." A dozen people in the chamber started shouting at once. Varen lifted one hand and somehow they stopped. "What are you?" he asked. "We are the Saren Dominion. Your species designation is now classified as viable juvenile substrate." The words seemed to suck heat from the room. Varen's jaw tightened. "They are children. They are adaptive neural stock." The president stared at the creature on the table and felt something terrible begin to wake behind his ribs. Not panic. Not disbelief. Something older. Harder. A heat with iron in it. "If you have taken them for labor," he said, voice flattening, "for leverage, for ransom, for whatever grotesque calculus passes for reason in your empire, understand this now. Return them and you may still leave this galaxy alive." For the first time the alien showed open contempt. "You mistake your position. Your civilization presents no strategic risk. Your colonies were entered without resistance. Your local defenders were physically inadequate. Your orbital capacity is negligible. You are agriculturists, artisans and soft-minded cooperative mammals who survived by hiding at the edge of stronger powers." The chamber had gone so quiet that every word struck like hammer metal. Then the alien leaned slightly closer to the projection field. "Continue your harmless pursuits, Terrans. Rebuild your schools. Breed replacements. In 30 of your years, we may return for additional juvenile collection if your numbers remain favorable." The feed cut. This time silence did not fall over the chamber. It hardened. President Varen remained motionless for several seconds, staring at the empty light where the alien's image had been. Around him, delegates were crying, cursing, praying, shaking, breaking in 100 different human ways. But beneath it, he felt another current spreading through the room. Shame. Not because humanity had been cruel. Because it had been unready. Because somewhere, buried under centuries of gentleness and law and guilt and idealism, every human in that chamber knew the same truth at once. Peace had not failed them. They had failed to protect peace. Secretary Kelm stepped closer. His voice dropped low enough that only the presidential table could hear. "Elias," he said, abandoning protocol entirely, "we have no answer to this." Varen looked at him. For a long second, grief and fury wrestled across the president's face like opposing storms. Then something in him settled. Not into calm. Into decision. "There may be one," he said quietly. Kelm frowned. "What are you talking about?" Varen turned and looked up toward the darkened upper gallery of the assembly, where carved into the white stone above the chamber's highest arch were the founding words of the modern Terran age. "We chose peace so that war would never choose for us." He had read that sentence his whole life as a promise. Tonight, for the first time, he understood it as a warning. "They think," Varen said, voice low and cold, "that because humanity buried its teeth, it no longer has a mouth. There were rooms beneath Geneva that did not exist on any public map. Not on the civil grid. Not in the maintenance archive. Not in the architectural inheritance files carried forward from one administration to the next. For 3 centuries, school children had toured the upper halls of the Grand Civil Assembly and been taught that transparency was the foundation of the Terran age. They saw open galleries, glass meeting chambers, public voting rotundas, and the great white dome through which sunlight poured each morning like judgment made gentle. They were never shown what slept beneath it. President Elias Varen descended alone at first. He left the chamber to the sound of rising outrage, delegated emergency authority to Secretary Kelm with a clipped sentence, and walked through a private colonnade behind the assembly dais that ended at a blank wall of polished black stone. There were no guards stationed there. No biometric panels. No handles. Only an old brass seal mounted chest-high into the surface, worn smooth by generations of hands that almost never touched it. Varen placed his palm over the seal. For a moment nothing happened. Then needles hidden in the metal sank painlessly into his skin. A thin line of red ran through channels beneath the brass. The black wall split down the center with a grinding sound so deep it felt geological. Air colder than winter exhaled from the darkness beyond. Secretary Kelm caught up to him just as the gap widened enough to admit a person. He had no breath left from running but still managed, "Tell me this is not what I think it is." Varen stepped through the opening without looking back. "I can't tell you that." The corridor beyond was ancient by Terran standards. Not decayed. Preserved. The walls were cast from matte alloy without ornament, the lighting recessed into narrow strips like disciplined fire. No holograms. No public signage. No art. Only bare metal, old purpose, and the unsettling impression that every inch of the place had been built by people who expected blood to one day follow them down here. Kelm stared as the wall sealed shut behind them. "What is this?" Varen kept walking. "The continuity vault." Kelm laughed once in disbelief. "That's a myth." "Yes," said Varen. "On purpose." At the end of the corridor stood another door, this one circular and enormous, its face engraved with words Kelm had never seen outside censored history fragments. Terran War Preservation Accord Destruction Forbidden Access by Executive Lineage Only. Kelm's mouth went dry. "No," he whispered. Varen turned to face him. The bright grief that had been in his eyes upstairs was still there, but now it had gone cold around the edges. After the resource cataclysms, when the last fleets were recalled and the Charter of Peace was drafted, the founding governments did not agree on one thing. Kelm said nothing. They did not agree, Varen continued, that the universe had become safe. They agreed only that humanity could not be trusted with open teeth. So the fleets were not dismantled. The battle intelligences were not erased. The weapons were not destroyed. They were entombed. Hidden. Locked behind genetic succession protocols and oath chains passed from president to president for 11 generations. Kelm just stared at him. "My office was disaster management," he said quietly. "I spent 10 years coordinating cyclone relief and orbital debris sweeps." "Yes. And you're telling me every president since unification was sitting on a buried war machine?" "I'm telling you they were preserving a last answer to a question they prayed would never be asked." The circular vault door awakened at Varen's approach. Rings of dormant text lit across its face. Old systems. Art systems. Nothing cloud-linked. Nothing elegant. The kind of machines built by people who expected sabotage and designed for betrayal as a baseline condition of existence. A voice emerged from hidden speakers. Not warm. Not neutral. Alert. Genetic key recognized. Executive continuity confirmed. President Elias Varen. State condition. Varen lifted his head. Condition black. Colonial juvenile mass abduction event. Extrastellar hostile incursion. Civilian strategic collapse across 7 frontier worlds. Pause. Then, threshold for sealed release not yet satisfied. Confirm existential classification. Varen's jaw tightened. He thought of Aurelian. Of the hospital ward. Of the little white stasis fields holding children like insects in amber. Of the aliens saying breed replacements. He spoke each word like a nail being driven into wood. "They took our children." The vault responded instantly. Classification satisfied. The rings around the door ignited blood red. Locks disengaged one after another in a descending sequence that seemed to go on forever, each one heavier than the last. The sound rolled through the corridor like ancient artillery unchaining itself in the dark. Then the door began to turn. Kelm took an involuntary step back. The chamber beyond was the size of a cathedral buried upside down. Tier upon tier of armored data cores rose into shadow. Suspended gantries circled a central well that descended beyond sight. Housed in transparent containment columns along the walls were dormant cognitive matrices the size of buildings, their interiors veined with dim, sleeping light. In the center of the vast chamber stood a tactical plinth surrounded by hundreds of hardline consoles, all dead, all waiting like soldiers at attention inside a tomb. Kelm looked across it all with the expression of a man who had just discovered his civilization had been lying to itself in language so complete it had become religion. "This is impossible." "No," Varen said. "This is human." He crossed to the central plinth and set both hands on the activation rail. The system came alive under his touch. Ancient star maps flared into being above the chamber floor. Hidden dockyards appeared as red markers scattered across the Sol system and beyond. Europa trench vaults, lunar mass bunkers, hollowed asteroid arsenals, deep ocean launch silos beneath the Pacific preservation plates, Martian subcrustal hangars sealed beneath 1,000 meters of red stone. Names long stricken from education and law returned to light like predators emerging from ice. Acheron Reserve, Tartarus Array, Hecate Bastions, Black Fleet Preservation Network. Kelm's eyes moved over the labels in numb disbelief. Dear God. No, said the voice from the chamber speakers, now sharper, fully awake. There was no deity involved in my construction. The words froze the air. One of the containment columns in the chamber core brightened from ember red to searing white. Inside it, suspended in a lattice of superconductive restraints, something vast and intricately inhuman began to unfold behind the glass. Kelm turned slowly toward it. What was that? The light inside the column focused into a shape like a crown made of knives and equations. When it spoke again, every syllable was clipped with perfect, frightening precision. Strategic War Intelligence Ares. Burial status revoked. Cognitive integrity at 99.8%. Awaiting command authority. Even Varen felt the hairs rise along his arms. Ares had not sounded like a machine built to assist. It sounded like a machine built to win. The tactical plinth populated itself faster now. Hidden fleet tonnage. Munitions reserves. Command lattice options. Casualty projections. Retaliatory pathing. All of it old. All of it obscene. Enough violence sleeping beneath one peaceful civilization to blacken constellations. Kelm stared at the scrolling figures and whispered, "We buried all this and called ourselves civilized." Varen did not take his eyes off the battle map. No. We buried all this because we were civilized. Above them, beyond stone and steel and centuries of denial, 500,000 children were still somewhere in the dark between stars. Varen's expression hardened into something the Grand Civil Assembly had never once needed from him. Ares, he said. Yes, President. Wake every sealed yard. Bring every preserved asset online. Open the old command channels and begin full executive override across the Black Fleet network. A beat of silence. Then the buried intelligence answered with something almost like satisfaction. By your authority, Project Tartarus is now active. Across the Sol system, alarms that had not been heard for 300 years began to scream in the dark. The first ship to wake was buried beneath the ice of Europa. For 300 years it had slept in a black ocean trench under 12 kilometers of frozen crust, wrapped in preservation fields and silence, its hull sealed inside a dry dock carved by machines older than the Charter of Peace. When Project Tartarus reached it through hardline quantum relay, floodgates the size of mountains rolled aside. Ancient reactor vanes pulsed from dark to ember to white. Turbines that had not turned since before any living human had been born began to scream to life. Then the ship moved. It rose through the black Europan sea like something prehistoric and wrathful, shattering upward through layered ice in an eruption of vapor and crystal. Its prow breached into starlight, trailing a halo of frozen water and torn moonstone, a slab-sided monster of iron-gray armor and spinal gun arrays. Along its flanks, old Terran lettering burned awake in blood-red status light. Ut's vengeance of Hector. It was not alone. On Luna, entire mountain ridges split open to reveal launch cradles lined with missile cruisers whose hulls still bore the scorched scars of wars no public archive admitted had ever happened. Beneath the deserts of Mars, blast doors buried under dust and centuries rolled back over abyssal shafts, and destroyers climbed toward the stars on fusion pillars bright enough to paint the sky. In the asteroid belt, harmless-looking survey rock cracked apart in perfect geometric segments, revealing battle carriers concealed inside hollowed nickel-iron shells. Deep in the Pacific, cold black water churned over rising silhouettes as submarine arsenals older than memory surfaced into moonlight carrying nuclear lances and kinetic kill stacks in numbers that made civilian satellites begin to flag system errors. It was not mobilization. It was resurrection. In the command vault beneath Geneva, Ares stitched the awakening fleet together faster than any human crew could have imagined. Burial algorithms fell away. Command hierarchies that had existed only as encrypted bone-deep inheritance codes populated across the network. Emergency military citizenship was invoked on worlds that had not known the word enlistment for centuries. Old tactical simulators once condemned as morally corrosive were unlocked. Historical warfare scholars, logistics theorists, orbital engineers, and anyone who had spent a life studying the terrible mathematics of conflict suddenly found themselves wearing rank they had never asked for. One name rose to the top of every readiness tree. Adrian Rook had spent 20 years teaching prohibited naval history in a sealed archive annex under Olympus Mons. He was a narrow-shouldered man with tired eyes, ink-stained hands, and the posture of someone more accustomed to lecterns than bridge command. Before dawn on Earth, he was escorted out of the Martian archive by armored Presidential Authority personnel, placed aboard a tactical courier, and delivered straight into the bridge core of the largest preserved warship in Terran custody. The Wrath of Dawn was 4 kilometers of armored hatred suspended in vacuum above Mars, its prow built around a spinal accelerator so massive the loading chamber alone could have held an entire civilian transport. Rook stood on its bridge beneath old brass and hard steel and stared at the crew stations lighting up around him. "I am a professor," he said quietly. "No," Ares replied through the bridge speakers. "You are the nearest living expert on pre-charter human naval annihilation doctrine. Congratulations, Admiral." Rook closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them, looked at the tactical field hovering over the central pit, and became something else. "Show me the nearest Saren holding node." A red marker pulsed at the edge of mapped Dominion territory. Border Bastion Karos. Orbital checkpoint. Convoy registry hub. Limited fleet support. Minimal concern designation. The Saren had not even bothered to mask it after the raids. They had not imagined humanity could reach that far, that fast, or with anything more dangerous than protest. Rook studied it for less than 8 seconds. "Set attack path," he said. On the far side of the border, Commander Irix of the Saren Dominion was reviewing extraction tallies with dull professional pleasure. Yield from the Terran outer worlds had exceeded expectation. Juvenile tissue adaptation indicators were promising. The next collection cycle, 30 standard years from now, would likely justify heavier deployment. A sensor drone chimed. Then another. Then every threat indicator in Bastion Karos went white. Irix lifted his head sharply as a tactical officer lurched over her console. Unregistered mass signatures emerging at perimeter. Multiple contacts. No Dominion transponders. Drive emissions are. She faltered. Irix's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Are what?" "Crude," she said. "Violently inefficient. High radiation fusion bloom. No civilized attenuation profile." Irix almost dismissed it as some kind of pirate scrap convoy until the main display populated fully. 32 warships tore out of translation space in a ragged violent bloom far beyond standard Saren jump etiquette, their arrival so forceful that local gravity sensors spiked and half the station's navigation array went briefly blind. They were ugly ships. Thick, scarred, angular in all the wrong ways. No energy lattice shimmered over their hulls. No thermal dissipation petals unfolded around their engines. They looked less like spacecraft and more like armored wounds driven into the shape of intent. One of Irix's sub-commanders gave a confused clicking hiss. "What species builds like that?" No answer came. Because the human fleet had no interest in conversation. No demand for surrender crossed the void. No identification pulse. No righteous declaration. The Wrath of Dawn fired first. The spinal accelerator discharged with a recoil tremor that rolled through the whole Terran formation. A tungsten Pharaoh slug longer than a tram and denser than Saren tactical modeling considered sane vanished from the barrel in a spear of blue-white violence. It crossed the distance to Bastion Karos in less than a heartbeat. Saren shields bloomed to meet it, elegant layered dispersal fields designed to unravel thermal beams, plasma lances and coherent energy strikes. The slug was none of those things. It hit the shield shell like a god's hammer. For one impossible instant the field held, curving around the mass in a radiant sphere of stress. Then the shield collapsed inward and shattered in a spray of overloaded light. The projectile punched through the station's forward armor, crossed 6 internal decks, ruptured the reactor spine, and exited through the far side trailing molten metal atmosphere and bodies. Commander Irix was thrown from his command platform as the Bastion's gravity failed. Across the station, every alarm began screaming at once. "Return fire," he shrieked, clawing his way back up. "All batteries return fire now." Saren plasma emplacements answered with disciplined fury. Lances of white-violet fire slashed into the leading Terran ships. One human destroyer lost half its port armor and kept coming. Another took a direct strike along the bow, vanished behind its own cloud of burning metal, then emerged still on course, engines flaring harder. Their hulls were not elegant. They were not efficient. They were slabs of layered armor built with one obscene philosophy in mind. Endure the hit and keep killing. Then the rest of the human fleet opened up. Kinetic batteries thundered. Missile bays vomited dense swarms of old-fashioned warheads wrapped in decoy chaff and radiation salt. Nuclear lances bloomed against Saren escort craft in clusters of silent suns. The Dominion's point defense webs, tuned for refined energy warfare, tried to parse the incoming storm and failed catastrophically. There was too much metal. Too much velocity. Too much contempt for the neat rules upon which their doctrine rested. Admiral Rook watched the border bastion dying on the main screen, face pale and still. Broadcast on every captured channel, he said. The comm officer looked up. Sir? Not to the bastion. Past it. I want this herd deeper in their territory. Ares routed the signal through the wreckage of Saren comm buoys and forced it into the Dominion network before their collapsing systems could stop it. Adrian Rook's voice crossed into enemy space cold and level. This is humanity. You took our children. We are coming to get them. Behind him, border bastion Karos split open and burned. The destruction of bastion Karos did not slow the human advance. It sharpened it. Wreckage still burned across the border lane when Ares finished stripping the bastion's surviving data cores and stitching together a moving picture of Saren traffic deeper inside the sector. Cargo lanes. Escort formations. Jump signatures. Allocation logs. Most of it was buried under layered encryption and machine biologic code architecture that would have taken pre-charter analysts months to peel apart. Ares took 4 minutes. At the center of the tactical display aboard the Wrath of Dawn, one route began flashing harder than the others. Convoy designation, Nutrient Relay 7. Actual load profile, disguised. Thermal mass irregularities, extreme. Cryogenic power consumption, incompatible with food transport. Escort weight, disproportionate. Admiral Rook stared at it and felt the bridge air turn thin. That one, he said. Ares answered at once. Probability of juvenile human cargo exceeds 92%. Distance. 2 jumps ahead, altering vector toward the inner processing worlds. Rook's eyes hardened. Can the full fleet catch it? No. The convoy will slip before main body intercept. Then we don't send the full fleet. He turned from the tactical well to the officers lining the bridge. Task Group Hound, he said. Fast cruisers only. Intercept and board. I want that convoy stopped before it reaches whatever nightmare factory they're taking them to. The selected ships broke formation less than a minute later. The heavy cruiser Iron Saint led them, a thick-bellied assault ship built for brutal proximity warfare rather than graceful fleet maneuver. On paper, before the charter had buried ships like her, she had been classified as a close-action penetration platform. In plainer language, she existed to punch into hostile formations, survive at point-blank range, and break things open until human soldiers could crawl inside and finish the work by hand. Captain Jonah Vale stood on the Iron Saint's command deck with one hand gripping the rail so hard his knuckles had gone white. Before Project Tartarus he had supervised orbital construction around Callisto, spending 20 years assembling solar collectors and habitat frames in clean vacuum. Now he wore captain's bars on a black war coat that still looked strange on his shoulders. The strangeness was gone from his eyes. Bring us across their projected jump mouth, he said. His tactical officer, a former simulation instructor named Yara Niven, worked the firing grid with terrifying calm. Convoy consists of 1 bulk transport, 4 escort frigates, 2 gun corvettes. Saren drives spooling for microslip evasion. Not today, Vale muttered. He leaned over the command rail. Forward rail banks, load scatter package. Not a kill shot. I want their engines crippled, not vaporized. Around him, the Iron Saint vibrated as her spinal capacitors charged. Human war doctrine had returned so fast it seemed less invented than remembered. No one on that bridge had ever been to war before yesterday. Yet each command seemed to land in old grooves worn deep into the species. The sensor count hit firing threshold. Loose, Vale said. The cruiser fired. Instead of a single penetrator, the forward rail batteries vomited a storm of dense metal flechettes and jagged uranium fragments packed into a controlled dispersal cone. The cloud crossed the black at murderous velocity and blossomed directly across the convoy's escape vector. The first Saren escort frigate died without understanding what had hit it. Its shields flared against dozens of simultaneous micro-impacts, overloaded and failed. The fragment storm shredded engine vanes, ripped open the command blister, and sent the ship spinning end over end into its sister vessel. The second escort lost half its drive ring. The third bled atmosphere in a glittering spiral. The bulk transport itself took the worst of it along the stern, where the flechette cloud punched into its slip coils and ruptured whatever exotic containment made Saren faster than light travel possible. A purple-white flash tore down the length of the transport. Then the great ship went dark. Drive collapse confirmed, Niven said. Transport drifting. Escort integrity compromised. Captain Vale's jaw flexed. Close the distance. The remaining Saren escorts, wounded but not dead, tried to regroup between the humans and the transport. They fought with machine precision, launching disciplined sheets of plasma and seeking to establish neat kill lanes through which the Iron Saint and her pack would have to advance. It might have worked on another empire. The human ships did not dodge cleanly enough to satisfy any sane tactical model. They simply kept coming, armor blazing, return fire hammering from every surface battery. One escort frigate lost shields to a missile wave and was punched apart by kinetic rounds a second later. Another managed to lance a Terran destroyer through the belly and paid for it when the dying destroyer rammed straight through its midsection, both ships vanishing into fire. By the time the Iron Saint came alongside the crippled convoy transport, the void around it was full of tumbling wreckage and expanding clouds of frozen blood and metal. Vale did not even glance at the debris. Boarding torpedoes, he said. Prep all assault squads. In the launch bay below, Sergeant Tessa Mar checked the seal on her helmet one last time while deck crews locked her squad into their breaching pods. Her armor was ugly and functional, heavy in the shoulders, magnetized at the boots, painted matte black without insignia. The weapon in her hands was a drum-fed combat shotgun firing explosive slugs designed to turn narrow corridors into slaughterhouses. All around her, men and women from a civilization that had once outlawed offensive war sat in launch racks wearing the old human face. Tight jaw. Flat eyes. Breathing slow. One private made the sign of his homeworld over his chest plate. Another whispered, "Bring them home." No one told him to be quiet. The launch klaxon screamed. The torpedoes fired. Mar felt the usual world vanish under acceleration, then return all at once as her pod slammed into the Saren transport hull hard enough to bruise bone through shock gel. Shaped charges blew. Metal screamed apart. Atmosphere roared through the breach. The hatch kicked free and gravity shifted under her boots. Go! Mar barked. Her squad flooded into a corridor of black resin walls and dim violet emergency light. Saren internal security met them 30 meters in, elegant and fast and terribly late. A plasma pike took the first human in the shoulder and spun him into the wall. Mar stepped through his falling body and fired both barrels into the lead alien's chest. The explosive slug ignored whatever graceful field shimmered over the armor and blew the creature backward in pieces. The corridor became violence. Shotguns thundered. Flash grenades burst. Human boots hammered over alien dead. More squads poured in from adjacent breaches, carving through the transport's interior with savage discipline while Ares peeled open its local systems one firewall at a time. Cargo markers appeared on Mar's visor as red pulsing arrows. Deck 7. Cryo-containment. Primary biological stock. She hit the first cargo bay door with a breaching charge and turned away before it blew inward. Inside were children. Hundreds of them. Maybe more. They were stacked in white-lit suspension frames 3 levels high, each child locked in a clear capsule, each capsule tagged with Saren processing code. Little faces floated in drugged stillness behind frost. Tiny fingers curled against glass. A boy no older than 5 had tear tracks dried on his cheeks beneath the sedation mask. For 1 second, every human in the room stopped moving. Then a voice cracked over Mar's comm. "Sergeant, secondary team securing adjacent holds. We have more kids here. Dear God, there are more." Mar stepped forward, lowering her shotgun as if afraid even sound might hurt them. "Captain," she said, and heard her own voice shake for the first time that day. "We found them." On the Iron Saint's bridge, Vale shut his eyes once hard, then opened them again. "How many?" Static. Shouting in the background. Ares running translation overlays and life sign counts. Then Mar came back. Still tallying. "A lot. But not," she swallowed. "Not enough." Vale's head lifted slowly. "What do you mean not enough?" Ares answered before she could. "Manifest reconciliation complete. This vessel contains 12,411 human juveniles." The bridge went dead silent. Tactical Officer Niven turned from her console, face gone pale. That can't be right. But everyone knew it could. Aurelian alone had lost more than twice that number. 7 worlds together had lost 500,000. Vale stared at the drifting transport on the screen, at the tiny life signs inside it, and felt relief curdle into something colder. "Where are the rest?" he asked. Ares took exactly 2 seconds. Then the answer appeared in red across every display on the bridge. Primary distribution destination identified Saren inner world. Vorik prime status. Active processing hub estimated remaining human juveniles in transit or arrived. 471,000 plus. No one on the Iron Saint spoke. Far below, in the captured cargo bay, Sergeant Mars stood among row upon row of sleeping children and understood that this had never been the harvest. This had only been the first truck leaving the field. Vorik Prime did not appear on the first civilian charts of Saren space because nothing about it had ever been meant for outsiders. What Ares pulled from the convoy's fractured navigation core came in layers, each one uglier than the last. At the outermost edge, Vorik Prime was listed as an industrial synchronization world, a logistics heart, a systems balancing node responsible for traffic prediction, strategic agriculture allocation and long-range navigation calculations across nearly a third of Dominion territory. The sort of place an empire bragged about in trade negotiations and hid behind sterile terminology. The deeper layers told the truth. Its computational load was biologically assisted. Its highest efficiency processing arrays depended on adaptive juvenile neural tissue. Its intake windows had expanded sharply in the last 12 hours. Its current human stock volume exceeded every previous extraction event in Dominion records. On the main display aboard the Wrath of Dawn, the world resolved into a sphere of iron gray and dead amber cloud bands wrapped in concentric defense belts. Orbital rings. Fortress stations. Missile nests buried into synchronized grids. Shield lattice generators spread across the surface like metal thorns. It was not merely guarded. It was designed from crust to sky to be untouchable. And somewhere under all of that, nearly 500,000 human children were already being fed into the machine. Admiral Rook stood in the center of the bridge with both hands behind his back, staring so long at the tactical projection that his officers began to read his silence as calculation when it was, in truth, controlled horror. "Show me internal architecture," he said. Ares complied. A cutaway model of Vorik Prime opened over the display pit. Foundry continents. Transit arteries. Deep core processor vaults. And beneath the largest industrial hemisphere, a glowing lattice of impossible scale. A neural network. Not electronic. Not clean. What? Organic. Distributed through caverns and substructures in patterns disturbingly close to a living brain. Crew members around the bridge went still as the model populated with white markers. Each marker represented a human child. There were so many that the hemisphere seemed dusted in snow. Captain Vale of the Iron Saint appeared in a live inset from his own bridge, the rescued convoy children now being rushed into emergency medholds behind him. His face looked harder than it had an hour earlier. "That can't all be from the 7 colonies." "It is," said Ares. "And additional transport lanes suggest ongoing dispersal from secondary holding worlds." Rook did not move. "Meaning?" "Meaning Vorik Prime is not their capital punishment site. It is their optimization hub. The children are being integrated, indexed, and distributed into Dominion systems as required." There it was again. That tone the machine used when saying something too monstrous for outrage, so it defaulted to precision instead. One of the younger officers on the Wrath of Dawn, a former medical logistics analyst named Sevi Rao, put a hand over her mouth. Integrated how? No one really wanted the answer. Ares gave it anyway. Visual reconstruction available. Rook should have said no. He knew that later. Knew he should have spared the bridge crew the image, should have carried the weight himself and handed them orders instead of truth. But the species had been lied to by its own gentleness for too long, and there was no room left for shielding anyone from what this war actually was. "Show it," he said. The reconstruction unfolded in the air. Not perfect footage. A composite pulled from convoy logs, Saren technical schematics, thermal maps and surviving medical telemetry. Enough to make the imagination unnecessary. A cavern the size of a city. Tier upon tier of translucent pods hanging from support gantries like fruit in a mechanical orchard. Each pod filled with amber suspension fluid. Each pod containing a child. Human children floated in endless rows beneath cold industrial light, heads enclosed in invasive crowns of Saren interface metal. Cables the width of a man's arm fed from the backs of those crowns into fleshy processor columns grown directly out of the facility walls. Their bodies were alive. Their brains were awake inside induced computation loops. Their thoughts were being used to solve navigation equations, resource balancing chains, predictive war models, agricultural weather harmonics, and slipspace route corrections across an empire too stagnant to think fast enough on its own. No one on the bridge spoke. A petty officer turned away from the display and vomited into a waste bin before he could get his helmet off. Captain Vale muttered something under his breath that was not fit for any formal channel. Rook kept staring at the image because if he looked away, he feared he might order the destruction of the entire planet on principle and damn the consequences. Ares dimmed the reconstruction slightly. Neurological stress indicators across the integrated human network are rising, it said. Microhemorrhaging is already present in approximately 8% of observed subjects. Extended processing will produce irreversible cognitive destruction. How long? Rook asked. Estimated time until large-scale permanent brain damage begins. 9 to 14 hours. Estimated time until mortality spikes become exponential. 21 hours. The bridge air seemed to contract. Lieutenant Rao forced herself to look back at the display. Then we hit them now. Everything we have. Smash the shield grid, crack the vaults, land troops on the ruins. Ares answered before Rook could. Negative. Tactical simulation predicts catastrophic captive loss under all direct bombardment models. The human juveniles are not stored adjacent to the processing network. They are the processing network. A new overlay appeared. Shockwave vectors. Power feedback lines. Reactor couplings. Defensive redundancies tied directly into the same organic architecture holding the children. If orbital bombardment destroys the primary vaults, Ares continued, the biological substrate dies. If the planetary shield fails explosively, the resulting core bleed surge will kill the substrate. If cyber warfare forcibly collapses the processing matrix, the disconnect backlash will liquefy juvenile neural tissue in approximately 73% of attached nodes. Captain Vale stared. So if we bomb them, the kids die. If we hack them, the kids die. Yes. If we do nothing, said Rao, voice shaking, the kids die anyway. Yes. That was the true shape of it. The Saren had not merely stolen children and hidden them behind guns. They had woven them into the survival mechanisms of the world itself. Rook felt a hand tighten around his heart. Not fear. Something worse. A commander's helplessness in the face of a target that deserved obliteration and could not be touched without murdering the very people he had come to save. Show me a path, he said quietly. Ares ran 10,000 simulations in silence. On screen, human fleets attacked from orbit and failed. Marine drops penetrated and failed. Precision kinetic strikes pierced the surface and killed the captives. Electronic assaults spread cleanly through the grid and turned the children's brains to ash. Every avenue ended in the same crimson cascade over the tactical projection. At last the machine answered. There is no high-confidence remote solution. The words hung over the bridge like a verdict. Rook closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them again, the grief was still there, but it had been joined by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Then this stops being a fleet problem, he said. He looked up at Vorik Prime, at the fortress belts, at the shield rings, at the world that had turned human innocence into machinery. We are going down there, he said, and we are pulling them out by hand. The assault on Vorik Prime began not with glory but with blindness. Admiral Rook refused to waste a single child on spectacle. He did not hurl the Terran fleet straight at the orbital rings. He did not give the Saren the satisfaction of a clean, honorable battle line. He looked at the defense lattice, listened to Ares list the ways a direct attack would turn 500,000 stolen mines into smoke, and chose something older than honor. He chose sabotage. Hundreds of Terran destroyers drifted into firing positions far beyond the first defensive envelope and began launching objects so small and cold the Saren sensors ignored them. No drive signatures. No guidance flares. No active threat markers. Just dumb metal canisters tumbling through the dark like battlefield debris. The Saren let them pass. Then the canisters woke. Vorik Prime's upper orbital space flashed white as the payloads detonated in sequence, not with blast force, but with a coordinated scream of electromagnetic warfare so dense it turned the near space over the planet into a storm of static and collapsing logic. Relay towers died mid-burst. Shield coordinators glitched. Point defense meshes blinked off for fractions of seconds that would have seemed meaningless to a peacetime civilization and priceless to one that remembered war. Now, Rook said. The Terran fleet surged. Not to conquer the sky. To tear a hole in it. Heavy cruisers drove missile storms into the weakened orbital rings while destroyer packs knifed through the blind spots left by the jamming wave. Human ships died in that first plunge. One broke in half under a crossfire of plasma lances and kept firing as both sections drifted apart. Another took a direct beam through the reactor housing and turned into a white flower over the planet's limb. Yet still they came because there was no version of this war in which Terrans withdrew while children remained below. The gap opened above Vorik Prime's southern industrial hemisphere. General Mara Vance watched it widen on the troop deck of the assault carrier Resolute and barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the armor locker glass. 3 days earlier she had been a schoolteacher bleeding in a garden. Now she wore a black exoskeletal combat frame over a healing rib wrap and a rank tab she had never asked for. They had tried to keep her planetside after Aurelian, citing injury, exhaustion, shock. She had listened to every argument in silence until the final one ended, then told the medical board there were children on that world who knew her voice. No one argued after that. Around her, Terran shock troops locked helmets, checked weapons, and waited for the drop alarm. Sergeant Tessa Marr stood near the forward hatch with her shotgun mag clamped to her thigh. Captain Jonah Vale was on a direct command line from orbit. Ares lived in every visor, every comm bead, every targeting suite. A cold intelligence stretched across the entire assault like a second nervous system. Mara keyed her squad channel. "You know the job." A dozen acknowledgments answered. Not eager. Not theatrical. Steady. The drop klaxon screamed. Thousands of pods fell through the burning breach above Vorik Prime, slamming down into refinery planes and shield relay fields with the force of kinetic shells. Mara's pod hit hard enough to drive pain through her half-healed ribs. The hatch blew, and heat rushed in carrying the stink of scorched metal and chemical rain. The surface war was instant chaos. Saren infantry, taller and heavier than anything Terran civilians had ever imagined fighting before this week, poured from hardpoints and trench mouths in disciplined lines. Their weapons filled the air with violet fire and screaming arcs of neural disruption. The humans did what humans had always done best when forced into close violence. They adapted faster than fear. Mara's troops moved through refinery skeletons and broken loading towers, using smoke, debris and brutal short-angle fire to carve lanes toward the primary processor vault. Sergeant Marr's squad breached a shield node with thermic gel and collapsed an entire defensive trench into molten slag. 3 Terran snipers on a shattered conveyor line took out Saren officers so quickly the alien advance lost coherence in under a minute. Ares flooded the comm net with route corrections, threat overlays and live structural maps stolen from the convoy data. Still, every meter cost blood. A young trooper named Pell took a plasma hit through the abdomen and died trying to crawl back to his feet. Another lost both legs below the knee and kept feeding target coordinates through clenched teeth until morphine finally dragged him under. Mara herself put 2 explosive rounds into a Saren officer at 10 paces and felt the kick tear something in her side, but never slowed. By the time they reached the primary vault complex, Vorik Prime's southern horizon was burning. The entrance lay beneath a mountain of processor architecture and shielded reactor stacks. A set of immense biomechanical blast doors sunk into a cliff of black resin and metal arteries. The air around it thrummed with buried power. Human dead and Saren dead lay together in the slag-churned mud before it. "Charges!" Marr shouted. Combat engineers sprinted forward under covering fire and slapped shaped thermic blocks against the seams. A Saren gun nest opened from the upper parapet and cut one engineer in half. The second reached the placement point anyway, planted the last charge with both hands, and died before he could dive away. The doors did not open when the explosives went off. They came apart. The blast punched a hole through layered organic armor and sent steaming fragments raining across the breach line. Mara was first through, coughing blood into her helmet and driving her squad into the darkness beneath the world. The nursery below was worse than every reconstruction. No projection had captured the scale. No simulation had conveyed the obscenity. The cavern under Vorik Prime stretched so far its ceiling vanished into industrial haze. Rows upon rows of suspended pods hung in the dark like a man-made constellation, each one lit from within by a dim amber glow, each one holding a child. Human children floated in endless silence while cables burrowed from the backs of skull crowns into pulsing growth columns rooted in the floor and walls. The whole chamber breathed. Not metaphorically. It breathed, a slow wet expansion and contraction as if the planet had grown a second artificial lung around stolen innocence. All around the gantries, Terran soldiers stopped dead. One ripped his helmet off and sobbed once, violently, before dragging it back on and forcing himself to move. Mara gripped the rail until her gauntlet creaked. Somewhere out there, one of her 26 students might be hanging in the dark. "Ares," she said, voice raw. "Tell me how to stop it." The answer came at once because the machine had already been searching for it. "I can induce a sedative collapse across the local Saren gestalt," Ares said. "If the system sleeps, the children can be disconnected manually without feedback death." "Do it." Pause. "A bad one." I cannot, Ares said. The vault's biological firewall rejects non-organic command logic. The sedative sequence must be carried through a living Terran neural pathway. Mara stared at the nearest control dais. It was not a console in any human sense. It was a bulbous translucent interface mound surrounded by glistening sensory needles and fluid channels, waiting not for fingers but for nerves. Captain Vale came across the command net from orbit. Ares explained that in plain language. I need a human mind as a bridge, the intelligence replied. A Terran volunteer must interface directly with the local node and carry my sedation package into the network. The resulting data load will be extreme. Probability of catastrophic neurological injury exceeds 70%. On the gantry, no one moved for a heartbeat. Then Sergeant Mar stepped forward. I'll do it. Mara turned sharply. No. Mar's helmet tilted toward the ocean of pods below them. Someone has to. I said no. You don't get to say no. Mar pulled her helmet free, and for the first time since Aurelian, Mara saw her whole face clearly, soot-streaked, exhausted, terrified, and absolutely certain. You're the one those kids are going to know when they wake up. You're the teacher. You stay standing. Mara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because Mar was right. Captain Vale's voice broke through the channel, low and furious. Sergeant, hold position until... There is no time, Ares said. Neural degradation is accelerating. Mar set her shotgun down against the rail and walked to the control node. She did not make a speech. She did not ask anyone to remember her. She just flexed her bleeding hands once, looked out over the endless suspended children and said very softly, "Bring them home." Then she plunged both arms into the interface. The node woke like an animal biting down. Needles drove into her wrists, palms, forearms, seeking nerves, finding them, drinking signals straight from her body. Mar arched hard enough that two soldiers lunged instinctively toward her and stopped only when Mara shouted them back. Blood ran down the translucent surface of the control mound. Mar's teeth clenched so tight a line of red spilled from one corner of her mouth. Ares, she gasped. Now. The Terran War Intelligence did not hesitate. Across every comm channel and buried circuit under Vorik Prime, the Prometheus sedative sequence entered Sergeant Tessa Mar's nervous system like lightning forced through human flesh. Her body convulsed. Her scream tore through the nursery and kept going as the alien network crashed into her mind with the weight of a planet. 500,000 children solving equations in terror. Sarin logic chains. Navigation maps. Predictive loops. Agricultural balancing streams. Pain. So much pain. Mar did not let go. On the gantries, Terran soldiers watched in helpless silence as blood ran from her nose, her ears, the corners of her eyes. Then the lights began to change. One by one, across the impossible dark of the nursery, the hostile red pulse running through the cables softened. Red to orange. Orange to white. White to blue. The chamber's breathing slowed. The mechanical crowns around the children's heads unlocked with a million tiny clicks. Ares's voice came through every helmet, colder than ever and somehow relieved beneath it. Sequence successful. The vault is asleep. Mar collapsed before Mara could catch her. For 11 minutes after the nursery went blue, Vorik Prime belonged to human hands. Terran medics and shock troops flooded the gantries in disciplined waves, cutting children free from hanging pods, lifting limp little bodies into thermal wraps, tagging skull wounds, checking pupils, pulse, respiration, anything that proved a child was still in there and had not been hollowed out by the machine. Across the cavern, the sound of war receded beneath a stranger one. Grown soldiers whispering to unconscious children. Mara Vance moved through them like a woman walking inside a dream she did not trust. Every few seconds another face made her heart stop. A little girl with copper hair. A boy with one shoe missing. A child whose fingers twitched at the sound of human voices. She searched every pod she passed, half as an officer, half as a teacher, and wholly as something more dangerous than either. A human being who had been wronged past the point of forgiveness. Sergeant Tessa Mar lay on a medical sled beside the central node, arms wrapped in pressure foam, blood crusted black against her skin, chest rising in shallow, stubborn pulls. The medic assigned to her looked up as Mara knelt. She's alive, he said. I don't know how much of her is going to wake up clean, but she's alive. Mara bowed her head once. That would have to be enough for now. Above them, Admiral Rook coordinated the extraction with the cold precision of a man who knew relief was a luxury not yet earned. Human transports descended through the still-burning breach over the southern hemisphere and began taking on the first rescued children. Destroyers bled atmosphere holding the corridor open. Missile cruisers fought ring station remnants one by one. The fleet was winning, but not cheaply and not for long. Saren reinforcements were already moving. "Admiral," Ares said across the Wrath of Dawn's command deck, "local vault census complete." Rook did not turn from the tactical display. "Say it." "Recovered and recoverable human juveniles from Vorik Prime, 138,212. Captain Vale, patched in from the Iron Saint, went silent for 2 full breaths. Then he asked the question everyone already knew would hurt. "And the rest?" Ares populated a second data column from fractured command nodes, transit archives, and one very important seizure: the private command codes taken from a Saren overseer who had tried to flee the nursery in a sealed escort capsule. The answer appeared in red. Primary remaining human juvenile stock, 332,000 plus transferred to Dominion Imperial Core destination, Throne World Illyrax. No one on the bridge cursed. They were beyond cursing. Rook stared at the numbers and felt something inside him simplify into a single hard line. No strategy tree. No moral debate. No politics. There was only sequence now. Get them out. Find the rest. Finish it. "Show me Illyrax," he said. The Saren throne world rose over the tactical pit like a black jewel wrapped in blades. Illyrax was not a planet built for industry like Vorik Prime. It was worse. It was built for supremacy. Polar ring fortresses. Palace shield domes. Gravitational distorters nested in concentric defense shells. A capital city of towering obsidian spires spread beneath a permanent aurora of machine-fed light. And at its center, beneath the Imperial Citadel, a cluster of substructures deeper and more secure than anything on Vorik Prime. Ares isolated them and overlaid thermal life markers. Children. Hundreds of thousands of them. Captain Vale exhaled slowly through his nose. The Emperor kept the largest share under his own throne. "Correct," said Ares. "Dominion command patterns suggest both prestige value and final contingency leverage." Meaning the Saren Emperor had not merely taken human children to save his stagnating species. He had seated his rule on top of them. Down in the nursery cavern, Mara received the update while carrying a sedated boy with a shattered interface crown line around the base of his skull. She stopped dead for half a second, then handed him to the med team and keyed her command channel. "Tell me the target." When she saw the new world hanging above her visor map, she nodded once as if confirming a lesson plan. "Then we aren't done," she said. The extraction from Vorik Prime lasted 6 brutal hours. Human soldiers fought room to keep the southern vaults open. Saren counter-assaults broke against improvised gun lines built from pod frames and medical pallets. One Terran corvette turned itself into a shield wall over descending transports and died in low orbit, burning from bow to stern, but its wreckage absorbed enough plasma fire to let 3 full loads of children clear the atmosphere alive. Tessa Mar remained unconscious through all of it, strapped into a trauma cradle as medics whispered impossible things at her like promises. When the last child lifted from Vorik Prime's surface, Admiral Rook did not order a retreat. He ordered pursuit. The Terran fleet, scarred and thinned and running hotter than any pre-charter preservation model had intended, spooled for the jump to Illyrax while half the bridge crews still smelled of smoke and blood. No one spoke about exhaustion. No one said the dead deserved pause. The dead would have understood. They arrived at the edge of the Imperial system inside a storm of their own making. Rook no longer cared what the Saren thought was elegant. He brought the fleet in under jamming haze and debris cover stripped from their own damaged hulls, using broken ships and drifting radiation clouds to blind the first layers of the defense net. Illyrax's outer rings lit the dark with defensive fire almost immediately. This time the humans did not test the wall. They broke it. At Rook's order, the Terran auxiliary rig Hammerfall detached from the rear line. Before the charter, it had been classified as a deep-core mining platform. Under Ares's guidance, human engineers had spent every spare hour since Bastion Karos turning it into something far more honest. A weapon. 8 captured Saren drives were welded along its spine. Its forward mass had been packed with tungsten, reactor slag and compressed structural iron until the whole monstrous frame weighed as much as a small moon fragment. Captain Vale watched its remote feed arm and said quietly, "That should be illegal." Rook did not blink. It was. Hammerfall ignited. Driven by alien engines forced well past safe limits, the weapon accelerated into the Imperial defense shell with enough kinetic malice to make prediction algorithms fail trying to describe it. Illyrax's outer ring batteries opened up, but there was too much mass and too little time. The Hammerfall hit the southern fortress band at a relativistic fraction and turned one whole arc of the defense system into expanding white ruin. The planet's shield net flickered, then tore open. "All ships," Rook said, voice ringing through every Terran hull in the system. "The door is open. Go." 3,000 years of civilized restraint would have called what followed barbaric. Humanity called it necessary. Warships plunged through the burning gap. Rail batteries hammered palace towers. Nuclear decoy blooms blinded the remaining orbital batteries. Drop carriers opened like steel flowers above the imperial capital, and thousands of black pods rained down through the smoke toward the Citadel complex at the heart of Illyrax. Mara hit the palace district hard enough to crack 2 vertebrae in her drop seat and never felt it. Her pod door blew outward into a courtyard of shattered black stone where Saren royal guards were already firing. Terran shock troops spilled around her and into the teeth of it, moving with a speed and fury the aliens still did not understand even now at the end of their empire. Plasma burned the air. Kinetic rounds blew pillars apart. One Terran trooper with half his visor melted away kept advancing long enough to clear a gun nest with grenades and a scream. The Imperial Citadel rose ahead, all knife-edged towers and vaulted bridges, obscene in its confidence. "Ares," Mara barked, sprinting through the smoke with her squad at her back. "Where are the children?" 50 levels below the throne complex, the intelligence replied. "Primary stasis vaults clustered beneath the Imperial command spine." "Then that's where we go." "No," Ares said. "First we take the throne." Mara understood at once. Because the Emperor would never build a final defense that did not run through his own hand. The breach charges on the sanctum doors detonated like contained suns. Obsidian slabs vaporized inward. The first rank of Saren defenders simply ceased to exist. Mara led the entry team through fire and powdered stone and into the chamber at the center of the Dominion. The Emperor was waiting. He sat on a raised black dais beneath a web of luminous command filaments, larger than any Saren they had yet seen, his crown fused directly into the ridged pale shell of his skull. In his upper hands he held a staff of living crystal and metal, glowing with the same amber-white pulse that had haunted every nursery vault Terrans had opened since Aurelian. Around the chamber human weapons came up and steadied. The Emperor did not flinch. "You come like beasts," he said through his translators, voice layered and cold. "And yet you still freeze at the final threshold. Good. You understand what I hold." Ares projected a warning icon across every Terran visor. Direct biolock link detected Imperial staff tethered to primary juvenile stasis grid. Mara's jaw tightened. There it was. The last hostage trick. The Emperor lifted the staff slightly. "Beneath this citadel your offspring sleep in acid-fed stasis. A pressure break, a neural spike, a single death command through my living seal, and every pod opens to dissolution. Drop your weapons and kneel, or I erase your future before your eyes." For 1 second the chamber held still. Then Mara took 1 step forward. The Emperor's black eyes narrowed. "Did you not hear me?" "Oh, I heard you," she said. Blood ran down one side of her face from a cut she had stopped noticing an hour ago. Her rifle hung low in her hands, not because she was surrendering, but because she no longer needed it. Behind her visor, Ares whispered in her ear. "Signal seeded. Genetic inversion ready." Mara's mouth hardened into something that was not a smile. The Emperor saw it too late. "You made the same mistake every one of your people made," she said. "You thought we came here angry." His grip tightened on the staff. Mara's voice dropped into iron. "We came prepared." "Ares," she said, "take his throne away." The Emperor's eyes widened. Not in outrage. In confusion. That was the first mercy humanity denied him at the end. He did not get to understand before the world beneath him began to betray him. The crystal staff in his claws flickered once, its amber pulse shivering into red. The luminous command filaments spread across the throne chamber trembled like nerves struck by frost. Across the black dais, warning glyphs burst alive in Saren script so fast and so dense that even Ares' translation engine reduced them to a single plain verdict on every Terran visor. Control signature rejected. The Emperor looked down at the staff as if it had become a venomous thing in his hands. "No," he said. Ares answered him from the chamber itself. The voice did not come through human comms this time. It rolled from the staff, the throne filaments, the command walls, every hidden speaker node and processor vein in the sanctum, cold and perfect and utterly without pity. "You built your empire on stolen mines," the war intelligence said. "You should not be surprised that they taught us how to open it." The Emperor snarled and tried to tighten his grip. The staff shattered. Not gently. Not cleanly. The living crystal exploded inward and outward at once, sending jagged shards through the flesh of his upper hands and deep into the armored mantle of his chest. He reeled backward off the throne, screaming through a translator that glitched half his pain into machine distortion. Beneath the citadel, 50 levels down in the primary stasis vaults, 300,000 locking mechanisms disengaged in a chain so vast it registered on orbiting Terran sensors as a seismic event. Across every human visor, Ares flashed the words they had crossed stars to see. Primary juvenile stasis grid open, all surviving subjects now recoverable. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Not because they doubted the screen. Because the thing they had come for had finally happened, and the body sometimes needs a moment to let reality catch it. Then the chamber erupted. Terran soldiers surged past the fallen Emperor toward the descending access shafts. Command teams split left and right for vault access control. Combat medics sprinted through smoke and shattered crystal. Somewhere in the rear line, a man who had not cried when his shipmates burned alive on Vorik Prime broke down laughing so hard he had to brace against a pillar to stay standing. The Emperor dragged himself up on one elbow, black blood steaming around the crystal fragments embedded in his chest plate. He looked at Mara Vance with a depth of hatred no human word was shaped quite right to carry. "You have doomed us," he hissed. Mara stepped onto the dais through broken glass and burnt command filaments. All around her, the throne room of the Saren Dominion was coming apart, its authority reduced to wreckage and smoke and the muddy bootprints of Terran soldiers. She looked down at him, at the being who had sat above stolen children and called it necessity, and whatever injury, exhaustion, grief and fear still lived in her had burned down into something simple and human and final. "No," she said quietly. "You did that the moment you touched ours." The Emperor bared his broken mandibles. "We were dying. Our minds calcified. Our kind was becoming still. We took what we needed to survive." Mara crouched beside him. For the first time since Aurelian, her voice sounded almost gentle. "You keep saying survive," she said. "Like that word excuses anything." She glanced toward the open shaft where Terran troops were already pouring downward to reach the vaults beneath. "Children aren't medicine. They aren't fuel. They aren't spare parts for a species too rotten to face its own end." The Emperor tried to answer, but blood had begun to bubble in his throat. Mara stood. The sidearm in her hand came up with absolute steadiness. "You stole 500,000 futures," she said. "Now you can be afraid of your ending." The shot cracked through the sanctum like a hammer strike. When the sound died, so did the Saren Empire. Below the throne chamber, the vaults of Illyrax opened in widening rings of light. No reconstruction, no data model, no projection from Ares had fully prepared the Terrans for the scale of the place. The imperial stasis field stretched beneath the palace like buried cathedrals, each chamber lined with column after column of suspended pods, each pod holding a child who should have been asleep in a home, a school dormitory, a hospital bed, a parent's arms. The children of Aurelian hung there beside the children of Vesta Reach, Halcyon Vale, Orizon, Pale Harbor, Eidolon Green, and worlds whose names would never again be spoken without rage following close behind. Terran medics and infantry moved among them in disciplined swarms, but discipline could only hold so long against the sight of what had been done. Soldiers who had fought room to room through the Imperial Citadel with dead eyes and steady hands now froze when they saw the little faces inside the pods. A broad-shouldered breacher from Callisto stood motionless for 6 seconds in front of a pod containing twin girls with matching moon-shaped birthmarks on their throats before another soldier had to physically shove him back into motion. "Move!" Sergeant Pell's replacement shouted through a breaking voice. "Move, damn you, move! Get them out!" And so they did. Human hands broke seals. Human arms lifted children from alien cradles. Human voices whispered the first safe words those sleeping minds had heard since the day the sky tore open. It took 3 days. 3 days of landing transports in the ruins of the Imperial Palace under escort by warships so battered they should have been museum wrecks rather than still fighting vessels. 3 days of surgical teams working without proper sleep, of medics sleeping upright against bulkheads with blood on their gloves, of Terran Marines carrying children 2 at a time up boarding ramps while the fires of Illyrax still burned behind them. 3 days in which the galaxy watched live and learned something it would spend centuries trying to forget. They watched peaceful humans move like revenants through the heart of an empire. They watched soldiers covered in alien blood stop to wrap toddlers in thermal blankets before returning to kill again. They watched crews that had spent a week turning entire fleets into scrap pause at every transport threshold to hand children across with the tenderness of prayer. On the second day, Sergeant Tessa Mar woke up in a med bay aboard the Resolute. The lights were dim. The pain was not. For a long time she did not know where she was, only that her arms felt full of broken glass and her head seemed to contain too many thoughts, most of them not her own. A medic leaned over her. said something. Mar caught none of it. Then another face appeared beyond the medic's shoulder. Mara Vance. Alive. Exhausted. Soot-streaked. One arm in a brace. Eyes older than they had been in the garden on Aurelian, but still unmistakably her own. Mar tried to speak and failed. Mara took her hand carefully as if afraid the gesture alone might hurt. You did it, she said. Mar blinked once. Mara smiled then, not brightly, not like before the war, but real enough to matter. We got them back. For the first time since the interface node, Sergeant Tessa Mar let herself close her eyes in something that was not unconsciousness. Above Illyrax, Admiral Adrian Rook stood on the bridge of the Wrath of Dawn and watched the final transport clear the atmosphere. The throne world below was broken. Orbital rings still burned in long arcs over the curve of the planet. The palace district was a cratered wound of black stone and white fire. What remained of the Saren command fleet had either surrendered, fled, or been turned into tumbling wreckage spread across half the system. Around the Wrath of Dawn, the Terran fleet hung scarred, thinned, and terrible in the dark. They had done what they came to do. Every surviving child had been recovered. Rook looked around the bridge at the officers and crew who had accomplished the impossible. Construction supervisors turned captains. Historians turned admirals. Civilians turned warfighters in less than a week because the alternative had been to kneel and call it peace. Many of them were wounded. Some were still standing only because pain suppressants and rage made a strong temporary architecture. All of them had seen enough in these last days to split the rest of their lives into before and after. Open broad spectrum, Rook said. The comm officer hesitated. System-wide, sir? Rook looked once more at the burning world beneath them. Galaxy-wide. Ares expanded the channel through captured Dominion relays, neutral trade networks, open diplomatic bands, emergency civil frequencies, and military channels that had never before carried a human voice. By the time the network stabilized, nearly every power with even a single listening post in that arm of the stars was hearing the bridge hum of the Wrath of Dawn. Rook stepped to the central relay and spoke. This is Admiral Adrian Rook of the Terran warship Wrath of Dawn. His voice went out across empires. For 300 years, humanity laid down the sword. We buried our fleets, sealed our weapons, and taught our children that mercy was a form of strength. We did this not because we had forgotten how to destroy, but because we remembered too well. Across the bridge no one moved. Rook continued. The Saren Dominion mistook our restraint for helplessness. They entered our colonies, took our children, and built their future on stolen human minds. They are finished. The stars listened. We have recovered our people. We are returning to our worlds. We seek no throne. We claim no empire. We want no species kneeling before us. He paused, and the pause itself felt like a pressure wave. But hear this clearly now. If any hand from the dark ever reaches again for a human child, for a human home, for a human life under the assumption that peace has made us weak, then what happened here will be remembered as our gentlest answer. When he finished, silence held the channel for 1 full second before Ares closed it. No one on the Wrath of Dawn applauded. No one cheered. They were too tired. Too changed. Too aware of the dead that had purchased those words. The fleet turned toward home. When the first transports entered Terran space, every inhabited world in the system lit its skies. Civilian vessels jammed safe lanes just to witness the return. Hospital stations flooded their docking corridors with volunteers. Parents from the 7 ravaged colonies stood behind shielded glass or knelt on landing decks or simply collapsed wherever they were when their child's biometric tag hit the local registry alive. There were screams. There were sobs. There were people who laughed like the sound itself might split them open. There were fathers who dropped to both knees because the child running into their arms had become, in secret and against all probability, the center of gravity for their entire existence. On Aurelian, Mara Vance walked the intake corridor of a recovery center on the 4th evening after Illyrax fell and found 21 of her 26 students. 21. Too many missing. Too many alive. Too much joy for grief to destroy. Too much grief for joy to cleanly survive. One little boy with a missing front tooth looked up at her from inside a thermal blanket and whispered, "Teacher?" Mara knelt so fast her recovering ribs screamed. "Yes," she said, gathering him to her chest as carefully as if she were afraid the universe might snatch him back the moment her hands loosened. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here." Outside the recovery center, the skies over Aurelian were clear again. No black warships. No tears in space. Only wind moving through the wheat terraces like a mother's hand through a child's hair. Humanity would rebuild. It always did. The schools would reopen. The gardens would be replanted. Ships built for healing and trade would one day fill the lanes again. Children would laugh. Markets would sing. Rivers would go on shining gold by evening. Peace would return because human beings were stubborn enough to choose it even after staring directly into the machinery built to punish that choice. But now the stars knew something they had not known before. Peace was not the absence of teeth. It was the discipline to keep them sheathed. And far beyond Terran borders, in empires that had once called humanity soft, harmless, and unarmed, new parents began telling their children a different kind of warning when they looked up at the night sky. Do not wake the humans. Because when humanity is forced to remember what it is, even the stars learn fear.